as we've been studying for a couple of weeks now, we're continuing. Okay, so of course we've gone in as best we can in chronological order, but starting in John chapter number 8, we see. Actually, John chapter number 7, Jesus comes to Jerusalem, and we see the week of the Feast of the Tabernacles in chapter 7. That closes down at the end of chapter 7. We pick it up in chapter 8 that he comes back and he's teaching in Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So, we think that's just the next logical day. It's John chapter 7, 8, 9, and halfway through chapter 10 are all together. Okay, so that's one thing to as we study, I want us to recognize the fact that we're not talking about weeks of time, we're talking about hours and days. And then John does the same thing for us when we get to the week of Passion, that there's a lot of information that covers a small amount of time, but a lot of information, so there's a lot of writing there. So this is one of the larger pieces of writing that is continual like this. In the other Gospels we see, more chapters sometimes, but it's more segments of time tucked together. This is a pretty good swath of time that we're studying just in these three chapters, 7, 8, 9, and 10, or most of 10, not all of it. So I want you to keep that in mind. So we'll just do a super fast review. Jesus was there for the Feast of Booths, Feast of Tabernacles, taught during that time, and maybe one of his most famous phrases during that week is, "I'm the water of life," right? And really, if we were in Jerusalem during that week, that would have meant something even deeper to us now, as best as we can explain it. There was a lot of things going around water. The priest would go every morning and get it out of the pool and come up, and it was just remembering that God had taken care of them coming out of Egypt during this time of Exodus. And of course, water's a pretty important deal. So water becomes, a significant in the story of the redemption of Israel out of Egypt, and symbolizing the provision of God and the water of life. And that's what he says, "I am the water of life. Come unto me, those of you that thirst, and out of your bellies shall flow rivers of living water." And so there's a real connection, a real wow. I didn't I understood we were celebrating, and I've been taught my whole life what this means, but you're saying that you're really the one that is our provision for life. So, of course, I hate to say the word adversaries, because he wasn't against them, but they were definitely against him. But the scribes and Pharisees didn't find a lot of humor in what he had to say. And he departs, and he comes back the next day. That's chapter number 8. We get into that. He comes back, and he's teaching, and in the middle of teaching, as we read last week, he's giving them these words of life, and they bring this woman caught in the act of adultery. And we studied that last week, and they cast her down at his feet and said, "All right, what do you say we should do?" Trying to trap him in some sort of a trap. And a fantastic story that we read through last week. And so he goes through that, and he says, he starts writing, and the Pharisees, the scribes all leave one at a time, from the oldest to the youngest. And he says to the woman, "Where are thine accusers?" And she says, "They're not here." And he says, "Well, go and sin no more." And he turns and he keeps teaching, because he's got a huge group of people around him. I don't know, for whatever reason, for years and years and years, as I studied this, Darren, I always thought that this was, they just kind of caught him off to the side by himself. This was a very private interaction between Jesus and the Pharisees and this woman, and it was not. It was on Fox News. It was right there in front of everybody, right in the middle of the temple courtyard. As a matter of fact, they were backed up to the treasury. The treasury was a busy place. And he turns and he goes, "Besides that, I'm the light of the world." And he goes through, and of course, the ceremony or the festival last week, there was tremendous tall pillars in the courtyard that had fires on them that burned and lit a large portion of the city from that one place. And he's, everything he's teaching them, there's a real hands-on aspect to that. And so that's, we got down to studying that last week, and there's this disagreement, and we end chapter number 8 with Jesus saying, I can't lie to you. If I told you I didn't know the Father, I'd be like you and be a liar, because you are of your father, the devil, who was a liar from the beginning, and everything he does is built off a lie. And that chaps their britches a little bit right there. So that's the end of chapter number 8. So I'll pick it up right there. I know we read just 3 verses of chapter number 9, or 2 verses of chapter number 9 last week, just to wet your whistle. So we'll get there pretty quickly. Chapter 8, verse number 58. And Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. And those are powerful words in the eyes of somebody that is living in the Old Testament law, because they recognize that that's the name that the Lord had given to who? And who's he talking to? Moses. Yeah. He says, Moses said, Who should I tell them sent me? And the answer that the Lord gave him was, I am sent you. So when he said, I am, they, well, in the modern day English, you would say they became unchained. Yeah. In Southern English, you would say they were spitting mad. In verse number 59, in New Testament wording, it says they took up stones to cast at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. And so we can't stop reading, because chapter 9, verse number 1 is just, this is the scene. I mean, they're mad enough to pick up stones. They want to stone him to death right there, And so he's leaving them. Chapter 9, verse 1, and as Jesus passed by, as he was walking away from them, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Now, I know we read that last week, but let's make sure we are all on the same page, because I think an imagination right here is going to be a powerful tool for us to kind of really soak in what we're taking. So I won't say he's running for his life, because we've already read enough times in the Bible that we know, and his time was not yet come. So Jesus was not running for his life in the fact that, that was not the time, but also in the same essence, he was leaving because they did want to kill him. Now, it wasn't going to happen because it wasn't the time, but that's the anger and things. And then it says Jesus saw him. Now, that makes sense. It'd be hard for the blind man to see Jesus. Right? It doesn't work that way. But Jesus looked up and he says, he saw the blind man, and his disciples saw the blind man. I don't know. In my mind, I've just kind of been stewing on the idea, of everything that had just taken place 30 seconds ago, 2 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago. We're in the treasury, around the treasury, and now we've made our way to the courtyard area, or just outside the temple gates, and his disciples. This is what they see. And, they see this blind man, and their question was, who sinned? Was this of his own doing, or is it the repercussion of sin that, and biblically speaking, can sin have generational impacts? It sure can, and there's evidence for that, and so in these guys' mind, they're thinking, well, either he did something bad himself, or somebody in his family did something bad, and there's generational impacts. There's current studies in science today that talk about the, and it's very easy to pick up on, parents that have children while they're using substances of different varieties. It impacts the child, and there's a tendency for all sorts of things. But it's not just substance abuse. Some studies say that just any well, let me phrase it this way: that sin has an impact on DNA. It literally does, and we can trace that all the way back from the book of Genesis. We could say that in today's world, um, are people better than they used to be? Yeah, DNA is not getting better. They actually, it's one of the ways that Christian scientists, um, and I hate to use the word prove or disprove, but they demonstrate the accuracy of God's word, because there's a simple law that has never been disproven, and it's a law that says things do not get better on their own without a lot more energy being put into them. Things naturally degrade, and DNA is one of those things that some of the things that we see, and maybe sicknesses that are like, we didn't used to have that 100 years ago, or we didn't see much of it, getting much more common now. And I'm not a scientist. People point to lots of different reasons, but I can say with biblical authority that things don't get better, on their own. And so the perfect creation has in a continual decline ever since that first act of sin. So in this story, being chased out of the temple, have heard Jesus preaching and teaching in the synagogue for the past couple of hours or however long this was, saw this woman brought and laid at his feet, caught in the act of adultery. And so these things are hard on their mind. And as they walk by, the only way that I guess my mind wraps around it is there are things, I'm sure, even in our lives today that we have just grown up with, and it is our natural response, when something like that comes across our plate. We were talking today. There was an opportunity at school to have a discussion, and one of the things that came up was sometimes getting angry at your children, and it's a natural response, and the part of the discussion roped around the fact that many times when parents get angry at their children, or that anger comes out at a child, it's really rooted in fear. They scared you. And so that response is anger because you scared me. And I'm not going to say that, but I'm going to show you that's not okay because you scared me. That's a kind of a natural response to that fear. Is we counter that with anger. These men had been conditioned to, when they saw somebody in this condition, that's a sin issue. That's just the way they were brought up. We look at it and it's like, well, that's kind of, can we think that way? Sure we can. There's, in our own lives, many times we look at problems like, well, I did something wrong. And sometimes we do. But not all the time. Sometimes things come across our lives that are not caused by, but are for the same thing that this is for. And Jesus answers, and he says, verse 3, Jesus answered, "Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but the works of God should be made manifest in him." Verse 4, he says, "I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." He refers to something he said just a few minutes ago. In timeline-wise, I know it was last chapter, it was chapter number 8, but he just said in chapter number 8, "I am the light of the world." He says, and don't you all forget that. He says, while I'm here, I will do work. Now, chapter 9, verse number 6, it says, "When he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, and said unto him, Go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. And he went his way therefore and washed and came seeing." It's a short interaction. Now, Jesus is going to interact with this man again in just a minute, but like we've done so many times before, let's go through that just couple of verses, and let's pay attention to the things that are familiar to us, and then let's also see if we can maybe think about something that is unique in this story, something that pops up here that we've really not seen pop up much before. And so I challenge you with that thinking. So he's come, they've seen the man, Jesus saw the man, it says, and that's how it's recorded. Jesus saw him, which was blind for his birth. And I don't know if it was just him looking at him and the disciples kind of turned and saw what Jesus was looking at. But then the disciples came up with a question, what about this man over here? We've already read the answer. It's not because he sinned or his mother or his father, but the works of God should be made manifest. And he said, I'm going to do the work. So it says, when he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, and told him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. And he went his way, therefore, and washed and came seeing again. How was the interaction between this man and Jesus? Who initiated it? Jesus initiated this one. Most of the time, if not all the time, and I haven't gone and taken an accurate record. Most of the time, I'll have to say it that way because I don't know for sure. Every time we see Jesus interact with somebody that needed help, it was either at their request or at the request of one of their friends or relatives or somebody like that. They were seeking Jesus out. So I need your help in this manner. And he responded. Now Jesus is the instigator in this one, from all things that we can read. That really ties in to what we read in chapter 9, verse number 3, where it says that this man was born blind, that the works of God may be what? Be made manifest. And so, again, we want to just note things that are a little bit different here. Let's continue on. So he took of himself now, because he spit, made clay, took of himself, anointed this man, and he said, now you go and do this. Is that something that we have seen before? Has Jesus ever told somebody to go and do something and the result was a healing process? Yeah, we've seen that before. That's not unfamiliar to us. It doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes Jesus they are instantly healed. Sometimes he says, go and do something. And it wasn't their work that caused the healing, but it did give an opportunity for them to walk by faith, And this man was a great example of walking by faith. Now, how old was he? We don't know his exact age. Here in a few minutes, we're going to get to where he was old enough to answer for himself. So in current Jewish tradition, we would say, this young man had already had his bar mitzvah. He had already gone into what they would consider manhood for their age. Now, if that was a 13, 14, 15-year-old, don't know. It's not said, but doesn't appear to be a super old fella. So he goes to the pool of Siloam. Now, the pool of Siloam is going to come back up to us in a little while. It's actually there's a piece of the story where Jesus, he talks about, it's in Luke, we'll find it, that there used to be a tower there that fell down and it killed some people. And Jesus refers to this pool again in that capacity. We never see it again of him commanding somebody to go there and wash again. But this pool is not far from the temple place. Far enough that, this person couldn't just go wash immediately. He had to go to it. It was a little ways away, but it wasn't across town. So we got to get that in our mind. So he went his way, therefore, and washed and came seeing. And I don't know about you, but I can imagine he was looking at everything and anything, smiling, saying, I always wondered what that looked like. I've heard it my whole life. Or, what color is that again? Oh, that's red. Oh, I didn't know it looked like that. He'd been blind from his birth. Let's just let the Bible speak for itself. I don't want to just belabor the point by talking. Therefore, or in verse number 8, the neighbors therefore, and they that which before had seen him, that he was blind, said, is not this he that sat and begged? Ain't this the blind guy? Ain't this the one that, we sometimes, make an extra plate and take two, or, if we had an extra shekel or something, we'd pass his way or pitch his way. They were definitely confused because it looked like him, but then it didn't look like him. Whereas before, his eyes would have a glazed over look and, they wouldn't track. Now he'd look right at you. Something would make a sound and he'd turn his head and follow it with his eyes. And so it really, there was a noticeable and immediate change in this man's life. Therefore said they unto him, How were thine eyes opened? How'd you get to go see? He answered and said, A man that is called Jesus made clay, and anointed mine eyes, and said unto me, Go to the pool of Siloam, and wash. And I went and washed, and I received my sight. And they said unto him, Where is he? And he said, I don't know. I know not. So they brought him to the Pharisees, him that aforetime was blind. And here's a problem. Verse 14. And it was the Sabbath day. Yeah. Now don't forget our timing. This is the same day that we started in chapter 8. Okay? So in chapter number 8, that's the Sabbath day. Jesus comes from the Mount Olives. He comes to the temple. He's teaching. We got this controversy with the woman. Then he has this interaction with these Pharisees, and he calls them the sons of the devil. And so it's still the same day. This is a very eventful day. So a little bit later on, the same day, I don't know if this is lunchtime yet, and they bring the man to the Pharisees on this same day. And it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then again the Pharisees asked him how he did receive his sight. And he said unto them, He put clay upon my eyes. I washed and do see. You notice this story's getting shorter. You ever ask somebody the third or fourth time what happened, and you get the same story, but it's like 2 words long. He gets in the same mode. As a matter of fact, here in just a minute, he tells them, I've already told you once. Are you going to listen better this time? I love that part. Well, we're skipping ahead. Therefore, 16, said some of the Pharisees, This man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Others said, How can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. And they said unto the blind man again, What sayest thou of him, that he hath opened thine eyes? And here's the blind man saying, he said, He's a prophet. It doesn't go over well. You all already know that, though. It's never gone over well when they get the truth, right? That he's a prophet. But the Jews that did not believe concerning him, that he had been blind, and received his sight, until they called the parents of him that had received his sight. Some of them said, You've been faking this whole time. And they asked him, saying, Is this your son, who ye say was born blind? How then doth he now see? And his parents answered them and said, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now seeth, we know not. Or who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age, ask him. He shall speak for himself. These words spake his parents, because they feared the Jews. There was already this imminent understanding, and we'd have to say an understanding, that if you are going to connect yourself to him, then you are out of the synagogue. That's a serious thing. That was, I think that it's not an unfair comparison that, even still today, a Messianic Jew, somebody that claims the name of Christ, they are evicted, not only from their synagogue, but from their family. They are considered dead. They're no longer, they don't even have the breath of life in them anymore. They just go on like they had passed on, and they're never considered again. That is the tenacity of this thinking, and that's the real fear that these parents were faced with. It's like, we know if we go down that road. Now, it was on the tip of my tongue. blackballed. Who knows what that phrase, what does that phrase mean? You're cut off. Nobody's going to do business with you. Nobody's going to help you. They want nothing more than for you to leave. And that is the idea here that they were faced with. So they were in fear of all those things. It was not just I think they'll be mad at me. It is our life will be over. We will no longer be welcome here. We'll probably have to move. And we'll have to, go change our names, whatever. Go into protective service. Yeah, about said secret service. That ain't it. But I want you to have that in mind when they answered this way. So, therefore said his parents, he is of age, ask him. Then again called they the man that was blind, and said unto him, Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. And he answered and said, Whether he be a sinner or not, or no, I know not. One thing I know. What was that? Whereas I was blind, and now I see. It's a great verse, I think, with Christians of any length of time being a Christian. We ask somebody that has newly accepted Christ as their Savior, and that's a good response. Well, how did he save you? I know not. I know I was lost, and now I'm found. The story of C.S. Lewis's conversion, I don't know how many of you have read through that or heard that story. I've not read all of his books by no means, but his testimony is the fact that, there were men in his life, and J.R. Tolkien was one of them, and C.S. Lewis got really interested in something called myths. And we would know them as fairy tales, right? And what he found out is that the myths or these stories from around the world had a similar pattern to them. And that's what gave him a little bit of pause. And J.R. Tolkien says, well, it makes sense if there's a single creation. And I'm really paraphrasing, but there's a root cause here. And that's why you see similarity. And so, this idea of Christianity was not foreign to him. I mean, he knew what it was about, but he declared himself agnostic at best, and said, if there is a God, you can't know him, and atheist possibly, there is no God. Well, after this several months of interactions and, speaking with these men, his testimony is the fact that, he was in the sidecar of a motorcycle, and his brother and he were driving to a little town just far away. And he says, when I got in the sidecar, I did not believe in Christ. And when I got out of the sidecar, I was one of his. And how it happened, I couldn't tell you. So that same story is true here. I was blind, but now I see. So he says that to them. And this one thing I know, whereas I was blind, now I see. They said unto him again, What did he do to thee? How opened he thine eyes? And this is where he answers. And he said, I have told you already. And ye did not hear. Wherefore would you hear it again? Will you also be his disciples? What a great testimony. Are you looking to take him in too? Oh, they didn't get it. Verse 28, they reviled him and said, Thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spake unto Moses, and as for this fellow, we know not from whence he is. Ain't it interesting? There's times where they have brought up the idea we are Abraham's, right? But now they say we are Moses's. I don't know, but I can't help but imagine that this is ringing in their ears when Jesus said, I am. Because he's speaking directly to Moses. And so now they bring Moses back into this story. We are Moses' disciples. We know that God spake unto Moses, and for this fellow, we not from whence he is. And the man, this blind man, and this is a young fellow, okay? So don't forget that. I mean, he's just old enough to answer for himself. I think he's 14 or 15. I mean, that's just my personal opinion. 16, I don't know. Old enough to still be at home, you know, that his parents were still, you know, a part of his life, but old enough for them to say, I don't know, ask him, you know. So he says, well, he's got to be a prophet. Here he tells them, then the man answered unto them, why herein is a marvelous thing. He says, answer me this. If we were watching the TV show Batman back in the 50s and 60s, it would say, riddle me this, you know. He says, what a marvelous thing. You know, he asks this really high-end question here in just a second. Why herein is a marvelous thing, that ye know not whence he is, and yet he hath opened my eyes. No, now we know that God heareth not sinners. But if any man be a worshiper of God, and doeth his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, was it not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind? And if this man were not of God, he could do nothing. What a simple statement of faith, right? I mean, but a strong statement of faith. He says, well, that's kind of curious. I don't know how he could do it if he wasn't part of God. How about you all? You ever heard of this before? You ever seen some? I mean, I'm telling you, it's a nice purple shirt you got on. Got a little stain right there. You got a little bit of mustard from your, well, it wouldn't have been a ham sandwich, I don't guess, but you know, I can just see, and he shares that with him. If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. They answered and said unto him, thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. I think literally threw him out. I think the guards grabbed him and pitched him out of the temple area. Jesus heard that they had cast him out. And when he had found him, he said unto him, back to the point, right? It's always about this point. This is everything that Jesus has done has been circling around this point since the very beginning. Dost thou believe on the Son of God? And he answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? And Jesus said unto him, thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with you. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. For nothing else, for no other purpose was any of this done than that singular question. And that same singular question is the reason we read all of the Bible. From the book of Genesis to the end, to the book of Revelation, all Scripture worketh together, right? And it's profitable. But the goal is to bring somebody or us or anyone in the world to answer this question, do thou believe on the Son of God? Do you put your trust in him? Here's who he is. And we can take it from in the beginning, God said, let there be light. And we can take it all the way to the end where it says, don't add anything else to these words. This is all that I have to say about the matter. This is everything that I am. This is all that I've done for you. The question is, do you believe on the Son of God? Will you put your trust in me? Here this man said with the affirmative, absolutely. Jesus said, for judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, and they which see might be made blind. And some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words and said unto him, are we blind also? And Jesus said unto them, if you were blind, you should have no sin, but now you say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth. He said, you're stuck in the pride of your own heart. That's really what they are. Now chapter 10 he doesn't even take a breath, okay? I know we have a chapter break there, right? But don't ever forget that chapters were somebody sitting down and say, well, I think this is a good place to, pause for a second. That way we can study easier. It was all about studying the Word. So let's not stop there. Let's read to the end of this interaction, then we'll be done for the night. But we're not done with this event. There's still more to come because we got to get into the middle of chapter 10 before this day finishes. Okay, so we see, therefore, your sin remaineth. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that entereth not by the door into the sheepfold, but climbeth up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that entereth in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the porter openeth, and the sheep hear his voice. And he calleth his own sheep by name, and leadeth them out. And when he putteth forth his own sheep, he goeth before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. And the stranger will they not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. This parable spake Jesus unto them, but they understood not what things they were which he spake unto them. And then said Jesus unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door of the sheep. All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, and the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. By me, if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out and find pasture. The thief cometh not, but to steal, to kill, and to destroy. I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly. Now he changes his name. Now what is he? I'm the good shepherd. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. But he that is a hireling, and not the shepherd, whose own the sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth, and the wolf catcheth them, and scattereth the sheep. The hireling fleeth, because he is a hireling, and careth not for the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and know my sheep, and I am known of mine. And the Father knoweth me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and shall be of one fold and one shepherd. Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life, that I might take it again. No man taketh it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have the power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This commandment have I received of my Father. And there was a division, therefore, among the Jews for these sayings. And we're going to pause there, because we're going to go back through that next week when we can break it down a little farther. But here, again, time won't allow us, but if we could have the time to study this day from beginning to end, we would see such a growth. And now here at the very end, he says, fellas, you've wrestled with this all day, and here's what you need to know, plain and simply. I'm the way. I'm the door, the way, the truth, and life. No man cometh to Father but by me. I know that's not read. We didn't read that there, but that's the inference. It says, I'm the door. Number two, I am the shepherd. And he says, and I'll tell you something that you all know about shepherds. Shepherds are sacrificial. And that's the example that he uses. He says, if this wasn't, if I wasn't here for this purpose, I would have run away at the sign of trouble. Y'all would have chased me off. Your threats, your abuse, your slanderous remarks, I'd have quit. But that's not who I am. I am the good shepherd, and I will lay down my life for these sheep. I love that in here, it's almost in parentheses, and he says, and I have other sheep. Us, thankfully, right? And he says, and I'll bring them into this fold too. Anyway, we've got to study that in itself next week. Anybody got a question or comment? Something we want to add to tonight's discussion, or what you learned or took away? Well, let's pray together. Lord, we come to you, and we do thank you for this evening we can spend, just reading through your word.